So I'm joined today by my good friend Garry Brotherston, who's a free church minister. But through our discussion today, you'll learn that life was not perhaps always like that. So welcome, Garry, and thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So I wonder, Garry, if we could just start by going back to life when you were young, as a child. Where was it that you were brought up?
I was brought up in the Yoker area of Glasgow. Nobody knows where Yoker is, so you always tell people it's near Drumchapel in Clydebank, and after you say that, they don't want to know you anyway. So in the Yoker area of Glasgow, and I had a good upbringing with my grandparents and my mother. My dad was never there, so my grandparents kind of stepped into the breach that was left with having no dad there, but good upbringing in Yoker.
Mm-hmm. And did you have like brothers and sisters as well, Garry? Were you an only
No,
child?
I was, after they had me, they didn't want any more. My mum thought, it can't get any worse. So I was on my own, so I was the only child. But my mum did get married when I was 13, and they went on to have a son. Mm-hmm. So I've got a stepbrother.
All right.
Aye.
So, and I mean, growing up in Yoker, you're saying you had a good upbringing, a happy childhood from what you remember?
Very happy. It wasn't a church upbringing, so I'm a minister today, so there wasn't that part of it.
Okay.
But I look back and it was lots of family get-togethers, very typical Glasgow. You know, family would meet up at times like Christmas and New Year. I've got memories of parties in the house when lots of cousins together and lots of adults' jackets just thrown on top of us. So it was very family orientated. So there's my mum's side. There's 10 of them.
Wow.
And they were Protestant, so I could imagine what would happen if they were Catholic. There would be 50 of them. So there was my mum's side's 10 of them. So lots of uncles and aunties. And although my own dad wasn't there, his brother was almost like a father figure to me. So and there was 9 on my own dad's side.
Yeah.
So that it was quite a large extended family, and a lot of love and a lot of care, a lot of humour. Again, very typical Glasgow.
Yeah. So there obviously came a time where, you know, you grew up into your teens. Were you then kind of mixing with a certain crowd, or how did you, do you know a little bit about what happened? It seems that there was a bit of, was it kind of gangs and running with other boys and stuff like that?
I can look back now. I wouldn't even call it gangs. I think it was just lots of young teenagers lost.
Yeah.
You know, you're drinking. I started drinking when I was about 12 or 13, and it was an instant love affair with drink.
Wow.
Gave me confidence, boldness. And I think the situation with my dad not being there was an insecurity with that. Drink would take that away. But after starting to drink at 12 or 13, I never really stopped. And so school started to be missed. My mum got married, I think I mentioned earlier, when I was about 13. She married an alcoholic. Okay. So more drink was on the scene.
Yeah. Plenty of drink in the house.
There was always drink in the house, and again, that's very typical Glasgow, especially back then, the early 80s and things like that. Yeah. But drink started to get out of hand for me. I was drinking every day.
Okay, so what age then were you drinking every day?
Probably about 15, and it gave me a reason to get up in the morning, and I really enjoyed drink, and enjoyed drinking on my own, right? Which is unusual as a young boy. Young guys back then, my pals, would like to go out and socialise and go to dances. I remember, and this will sound really strange, I remember enjoying sitting in watching the John Lennon Imagine video, drinking on my own. Right. That's not normal when you're 15 or 16.
So was anybody picking up on that, Garry? Was it your mum or your grandparents thinking?
I remember my gran. I was my gran's blue-eyed boy, and her own son. She got 6 sons of her own, and they would be angry about this because we never got the love Garry got. So I was the blue-eyed boy, but my gran picked up on things. Right. She used to kind of pull me up and say, "You need to do better at school. You need to get yourself a job." In fact, she actually booked for me to go to Canada when I was 15. Right. For 6 months, I went there and got a job. And I look back now and I can see my gran was just trying to broaden my horizons, get me away from not so much yoker, but get me away from myself
Yeah.
and the guys I was hanging around with and what I was doing. And so I went to Canada for 6 months. It was a great experience, but ended up coming back and I just picked up where I'd left off.
What about the drinking while you were out in Canada?
I was doing that
You were
out there
doing
as
that there
well.
too.
See, yoker wasn't the problem, I was the problem. I took the problems with me.
Yeah.
So there was situations in Canada that weren't helpful either, even as a young boy.
Okay. So back to Yoker, 16. How did things then kind of escalate from there?
I'd moved in with my mum and my stepdad. They moved to a different area in Glasgow, the Temple area. I don't know if you would know that area, but in Glasgow back in the early 90s was still that gang thing. It was very territorial. So if you came from a different area, a different postcode, a group of young guys would see you and just want to beat you up or chase you. And I experienced that when I used to go off the bus to go to my mum's house.
Okay.
I remember there was one night these guys chased me through a football park. That must have been 14, 15, whatever, and they'd weapons. So, and I thought, well, I need to carry a weapon as well. Mm-hmm. So I started carrying a knife.
Right.
Never in a million years think they would use it. But if you're drinking and you're out of control and you're carrying a weapon, then the clock's ticking.
Yeah.
Until you end up using it. So I lasted with my mum and my stepdad, I think, a couple of years. And that was a disaster. I was fighting with him every night. He was very abusive towards my mum. And I moved back down to Yoker with my gran. Okay. But the problems followed me. I was the problem. Mm-hmm. Wasn't a Tempo where my mum stayed. It wasn't a Yoker. It was me.
Yeah. So if we move on then to, there was a particular incident that happened, and can you maybe describe how you found yourself in that situation, what your own kind of condition with the drink and all the rest of it, and your what was at that time?
There was an ongoing feud between a young guy that I knew. He was 17, and there was a guy, a family that he wasn't getting on well with. There was an incident in January 1994 where one of the guys tried to bully my friend who was 17. He stabbed the guy, was charged with attempted murder, got away with it in Yoker, no witnesses, even though it was out in the middle of the street. So he got away with that, and then the guy who'd been stabbed came back for revenge in April 1994. Came back with his two brothers. Now the two brothers were there to restrain the other brother, but there was a crowd of us young guys that looked on, and we never knew they were there to restrain. All we saw was 3 grown men attacking a 17-year-old, and we know the 17-year-old, we don't really know them, so we get involved, and so they were chasing him and we were chasing them. So, and it reached a head at the end of a street, and a big fight broke out, and I think one of the 3 brothers punched the sister of a friend of mine. And that was the start of it. My friend whose sister got punched, ran into a house and got an axe, as you do. Came out and hit one of the guys, and so a big fight broke out. And I had a knife, and I get involved, and I lashed out with a knife, and I stabbed one of the guys, and tragically he died.
All right. Were you there when he was? I mean, did he die at the scene, or do you know? Were you around to see what had happened, or did you? I
was so intoxicated. I was, there's parts of this I sometimes wonder: was it down to drink that I can't remember, or is there a psychological block knowing what you've done?
Amnesia or something protecting
there might
you
be, and I'm not trying to diminish responsibility with that. I take full responsibility. But I remember bits of it, and I think I remember that the guy died instantly, just with the amount of blood. And apologies for being graphic with this, but so I remember the guy had fell. His name was Billy. I keep calling him the guy. He was somebody's son.
Yeah.
An uncle, a brother. So when he'd fell to the ground, I think I knew.
Yeah. So what age were you, Garry, at this point?
I was 19.
You were 19.
Aye.
And from there, did you kind of disappear off the scene? Did police have to come and find you? What happened then in terms of police and criminality and the criminal justice system?
I remember the next day, I woke up the next day, and what happened in between that, I've been told. Apparently, we'd went to a nightclub in Clydebank, and it would, it's shameful even saying this, it was probably that celebratory, we never backed down, we got them, and which is shameful even talking like that. Somebody's lost their life. So, but the next day I woke up and a friend of mine for yoga came in, and I woke up in a drunken stupor, hungover, and I knew something was up. And my friend came in and he says, that was awful last night. And I says, what was it that happened again? And he says, that guy died. So that was me really just being told that there was a guy died. And I think it was in the paper as well, or on the news, murder hunt underway in Yoker. And I was terrified. There was a 9-day period between the murder taking place. That was Sunday, the 10th of April, 1994. And then, so it was Tuesday, the 19th of April, that the police came through my grandmother's door and arrested me. But that 9-day period was just total paranoia. I remember parts of that and trying to get rid of the evidence, what I was wearing, burning that. There was a knife set in my grand's house. The knife that I'd had was one of that set, and after the crime had taken place, I'd put it down a drain. So there was a knife missing. And I'm thinking, how do I, if I get rid of this knife set, my gran knows it's gone.
Yeah.
But if I don't get rid of it or replace it, if the police do come in here, there's a knife missing, they could have. So I was totally paranoid.
And were you talking with your friends at this time, or?
Aye, I mean, we were all barstool barristers at that time. We know how the criminal justice system. We never had a clue. It was them that was saying you need to replace the knife set and you need to burn your clothes, and so I'd done all of that stuff. And then there was rumours as well. Obviously, people were talking. It was Garry Brotherston that done that murder.
Okay, so this was going around the streets of Yoker.
I was in complete denial. I remember my uncle saying to me, "I'm hearing in the pub that was you." And this my uncle, that uncle was my own dad's brother that I mentioned earlier, who'd been like a dad to me.
Yeah.
I couldn't even tell him. I says it wasn't me. I was in complete denial. I couldn't tell this man who'd helped bring me up that I'd taken somebody's life. So I was in total denial. But then the police came through my grandmother's door, dragged me away, taking me to Partick police station and charged me with murder.
All right.
And that was the last image I got of my grandfather. My grandfather died the day before my trial. He was quite unwell for a number of months leading up to all of this. And it's what after the murder itself, my mother's biggest regret was not being able to go back and say to my grandfather, "I'm sorry I put you through all that." Here's an old man that steps into the breach because my own dad's not there.
Yeah.
And the last picture he gets of me is getting dragged out to a police station, charged with murder.
That's tough.
No, it's horrible.
Hard.
It's horrible to do that to the ones that you love. And do you know, there could be some young guy watching this somewhere down the line thinking he's out there and he wants to be the big guy. Well, there's nothing big about destroying your family like that.
And up until then, Garry, had you had any experience of the criminal justice system or police or anything like that, or had you just been kind of running about and kind of getting away with
nothing?
things?
That was the first charge. I mean, most people, there's a progression system, breach of the peace, theft. No. I went right in at the deep end and a murder charge.
Yeah.
I mean, I was involved in daft things that I'd never really been caught for, but there was never any criminal
serious stuff,
fraternity or anything like that. I wasn't a criminal. No. Just a stupid young boy that was drunk, trying to get money for drink and things like that.
And clearly issues there that were following you about and were never addressed whilst you're young and, you know, culminating in this. So police take you to the police station, and I mean, is that you then in custody?
That's me in custody.
For really, that was the last...
Well, that was the last taste of freedom.
For a while.
Yeah.
And you would have gone through court on petition and then remanded at that point.
Yeah. So I was fully committed. I think they call it a 7-day lie down. I don't know if that's still in place. Yeah. So I got that, and I think I'd went to a Longregend Remand Centre, which was in Airdrie at the time.
Remember it?
Which was wild. I mean, the early 90s, when it was the gang culture in Glasgow, all the schemes, fighting, and how the state deals with that is they put them all together. So we had all these boys that are killing each other outside, let's put them all under the one roof.
Yeah.
So, and that was an eye-opener, because I'd never really seen that level of madness and insanity. I mean, the things I was doing with my pals, we were drunk, or you're full of, acid or whatever, you're doing things full of drugs. But to see young guys stone cold sober, I mean, Longregend was brutal. You're seeing guys getting their face slashed in the showers at PE. I remember thinking, this is a different world. Yeah. And it was terrifying.
Yeah. I remember visiting it, and I'm sure you had to cross over the yard at one point, and unlike other jails where perhaps they didn't have the opportunity to shout, there was always folk shouting out the windows, and it just seemed wild.
It was madness.
Yeah.
So that was for 7 days, taken back up to court, and then fully committed, and then you've got a lawyer appointed and things like that.
And did you go back to Longregend then for your
Back to Longregend for the fully committal, which was 110 days or something.
And during that time, you obviously described how you were at liberty with your pals, but I mean, in there on your own, how were you feeling?
Well, I wasn't so much on my own. There was 7 of us charged with murder.
Right, so you all went to
one was there was a girl charged.
Right.
She went to Cortonvale. There was others charged and I've never been able to work this out. They got no parole. Would it be parole? Bail.
Right.
Which at that time I remember being told you don't get bail for a capital charge, but they get bail anyway. So, but 3 of us were in Longregend. So there was 2 of us charged with murder. The guy that hit one of the brothers with the axe, he was charged with serious assault. So there was 3 of us.
Okay. So you all stuck together, did you, just to get through, or? Aye,
but there was a lot of distrust and things like that, because you know what, like the legal world is. I mean, they've got their lawyers coming up. I've got my lawyer in QC coming up, and it's no that stuff. Don't say what's happened. Don't tell the police anything. The lawyers at that time were telling all of us, you need to say this to get out of this, or we advise you to be saying this even if it's against your co-accused. And so there was a lot of distrust between all of us. We didn't even know what we were saying or doing. We were 17, 18 and 19, and you're looking at a murder charge. And so but I look back now and I always wished I could have just put my hands up to it, because I did the crime. And my co-accused, as I'm going to share later, we were actually convicted of murder. He's still in.
Wow. And
he was the boy that was done with the attempted murder in the January, who the guy came down to get revenge on. So he's still in.
Goodness me. So you're on remand then. I'm sure timescales then were much shorter than they are now. We've got people locked up for literally years. And you're saying your solicitor, your advocate, your QC at that time are coming up to give you legal advice. How long then altogether were you on remand, Garry?
So that would have been the 110 days.
Oh, right, so it's 100, okay.
Aye, so my lawyer, I had some of your lawyer friends were watching this, you'll know the name, old Joe Beltrami. So there was a guy from Yoker who knew Joe Beltrami and says, you need to go up and represent this boy if you can. And so he would come up and I lied through my teeth. I mean, I remember saying to Joe Beltrami, I wasn't there. And he looked as if, well, if you weren't there, what's all this evidence? But I was in denial.
Right.
I think as well there was a QC that came up at that time. I think this is in it. Is there a QC, Kevin Drummond? Was it?
Yeah.
Would you know that name? He came up and he came up with pinstripe suit and very proper. And I don't know if he took a look at it and thought, I ain't doing this. This is just guilty all the time. Okay. So I had a meeting with him, but then I was appointed a QC, Bill Taylor.
Right.
Bill Taylor. And your friends in the legal world will enjoy this wee bit. His junior was John Beckett. Okay. So Lord Beckett.
Now Lord Beckett,
yes, yep. So that was the junior. So I had they two representing me, and they were actually very they were very kind and compassionate. Now, I don't know Lord Beckett these days, but back then, I remember, the thing I remember about him is he was very kind and compassionate and very sympathetic towards my situation. In fact, I've since contacted him as a minister.
Yeah.
To say I apologise for lying and my life's changed.
Yeah.
And his secretary replied saying he knows your life's changed and he's glad about that. So yeah.
Good. And so again, you're pleading not guilty. You're saying, looking back now, things you wish you'd done differently, but you obviously went to trial, plead not guilty, go to trial. And your trial was it in Edinburgh High Court?
No, Glasgow.
In Glasgow?
Glasgow High Court, yeah.
And how long did that last?
5 weeks. It was a long murder trial because there was 7 of us, and video evidence, CCTV evidence was introduced. I think we were one of the first cases where witnesses wanted to give evidence from behind screens and things like that. So we had to get moved over to the sheriff court for part of it. But I look back at that trial, it was horrendous.
In what sense?
Just terrifying. You know, I didn't know really what was going on. And you're 19, you're very conscious that there's the gallery behind is divvied up into 2 groups. Yeah. Them that want to see people getting released and the victim's family, which absolutely they're entitled to think this. But so there was a lot of animosity in the courtroom. Looking over and seeing my mum, she's already tried to do her best bringing me up. She's married to an alcoholic that's no very nice to her. And how do I repay her? I take her up the High Court. So it was a horrible experience. You're going down the stairs. I don't know what like the High Court is now, but back then, this was in the days of even prisons were different. It wasn't toilets and all that. It was, excuse the French, but piss pots and all that stuff, and it was horrible. It was very draconian.
Yeah. And were you still of the kind of mindset during the trial of trying to be the tough man and denying it, or were you just sitting there terrified, not really knowing? Terrified.
I would love to tell you that I was a tough guy. Yeah. No, I mean, anybody that's a tough guy in that situation, it's probably Carstairs they need to be going to, because they're not right.
No.
Especially if you see your mother and a victim's family who you've destroyed.
Yeah.
So no, I wasn't a tough guy.
Yeah.
And looking back, I never was.
Yeah.
Carrying a knife isn't a tough guy.
No.
A tough guy's getting up and doing an 8-hour shift in the winter on a building site. That's a tough guy.
Yeah. And did you give evidence at your own trial?
Oh, disaster. I went up and just lied through my teeth. I remember the name of the prosecutor. I think I remember it was Charles McFarlane.
Okay.
Charlie McFarlane. He was good. I mean, he just had me. And on remand, the week before the trial, there was a prison officer who told us all that he did haircuts for trials.
Right.
We never knew it was a skinhead. So, we should have been found guilty just for that alone. So I'm up and giving evidence with this skinhead and swearing and lying just through nerves.
Yeah.
I should never have gave evidence, because that probably just sealed my fate.
Yeah, the low point of the trial.
Well, the high point for anybody watching, to give them a laugh. But it was a disaster.
Yeah.
And so the 5 weeks of evidence in the trial, the QCs, things like that.
Yeah.
The trial was halted for a few days because Donald Finlay, who was representing the girl that was charged with murder, there was a big Rangers game.
Right.
And of course, he was, I think he was the chairman or something at that time. So the trial was halted so that he could go to watch Rangers.
Right.
So we're sitting there thinking, that's great. We just want this over and done with. So these are things that I've just coming back to my mind actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the day of the verdict, the jury have been charged and sent out, and then it's a waiting game at that point. And I always, as defence counsel, that I don't know if I went through a period of that part of the trial becoming super stressful. I don't know, it's weaned a wee bit now, but I can't. And no matter what you see whoever's in the dock, and no matter what they're accused of, at the end of the day, you're still conscious that that's a human being, and their fate is about to be announced. And that, I think, as a lawyer, you can be very nervous at that point. But sitting as a 19-year-old boy, or were you 20 by this stage?
No, I'm still
You're still
19.
19. And these people, you're at the mercy of the jury, and you're about to hear either, well, guilty, not guilty, or not proven. What's going through your mind at that point?
I remember, I think it was North Court. That was the call. So we were in the cells, and then it's announced by the clerk or
the
whatever.
macer, yeah.
North Court, verdict, and I remember walking up the stairs to the court, and utterly terrified, because I think in my heart of hearts I knew
this is it.
I'm done with this.
Yeah.
And I think even looking back now, I could say I deserve to be. I did it.
Yeah.
I deserve to have the book thrown at me.
Yeah.
So we went up, and the jury some of them were crying. So they were just nice people. And that's never a good sign as well, because I think they were crying because they thought doing the right thing means sending two young guys down for life.
Yeah.
Aye.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the verdict's announced guilty, and I presume they would have had to get some reports for you. So was that another period of remand?
No. As far as I can remember, it was found guilty. I was unanimous. My co-accused was majority, and I'm pretty sure it was. So stand up. It was an old judge, Lord Murray. You could see he was a nice man. He was very old at that time, but even just looking back, how he dealt with the trial and how he dealt with us, he never took any great pleasure in saying, down with him or anything. It was almost, here I am again as a judge, another two teenagers in Glasgow, sending them down.
Yeah.
There's no winners here. Yeah. Even the Crown isn't a winner either. So he, as far as I remember, stand up. I get sentenced to life. My co-accused, because he was 17, it was without limit of time.
Okay.
WLT as they call it. So then take them down.
Yeah. And what was your punishment part? What was your...
Well, there was no punishment part at that time.
Okay.
The law hadn't changed in Europe, where you had to get the actual... the tariff or something like you call it.
Yeah, determine it.
So I had, during my sentence, I had to get taken back up to court when I was 5 or 6 years into my sentence to be given a minimum punishment period, as they called it. So I got 11 years. I think my co-accused got 9, but there he is still in.
Yeah.
I think he's been released twice and get recalled, but...
So his life obviously has taken a route where he's, for whatever reason or whatever he's been engaging in,
he was involved in drugs and things like that, and taking drugs. I think he's got a drug addiction in the prison, and we took two very different paths. While on remand, I started attending these prison fellowship meetings and hearing just the reality of God. I'd never gave God a thought in my life, even though I had all the questions about life and death and lost and all that stuff. But it's the only thing that really made sense to me, that I feel lost because I'm out of sync with the God that made me.
Had you ever been like to Sunday school or anything like that?
I don't remember. I don't know. My mum told me. My mum's told me since that she took me to a few church meetings, but I do not remember anything. So that was really the introduction of the Christian faith for me. But hearing about God creating us, being out of sync with God because of sin, nobody had to tell me that. I knew I was a sinner. Then hearing that God had a redemption plan, the whole gospel message, Jesus comes into the world, dies on the cross for sinners. So that question, what's that man doing on the cross? He's dying for sinners and for sin. So I heard all of that, and it started a train of thought, a journey, spiritual journey you might call it. Kept going along for a number of weeks, hearing the message of heaven and hell. Now, I thought, if there's a hell, I know where I'm going. And so I'd reached a point where I believe this. And then one day we had a guest speaker that came in, and he gave a gospel message and then made an appeal saying to us young offenders. There was about 20 25 young offenders, and he says if any of you boys want a new life, new chapter, clean slate, freedom, even in the jail, doesn't mean you're getting out, but you want to be set free today, getting right with God through Jesus Christ. He says, put your hand up if you want that. And an amazing thing happened. Out of everybody, I was the only hand that went up.
Is that right?
And you're not doing it for the popular vote.
No.
I mean, my co-accused were there, and I could see them cringing, thinking, oh dear, we know him. He's with us. And he's just put his hand up for Jesus. Not only is he getting slaughtered when we go back to the hall, we're getting slaughtered with him. But that spoke volumes to me, because here was all these young offenders. They were all celebrating the fact that you'd never ran away that night, that you'd used a knife, you know, with courage. And so they celebrated things that were wrong. And here I am, for the first time, doing something that's right. Standing up for Jesus, who did more than stand up for me. And they thought that was abnormal. Mm-hmm. So I put my hand up. Then the guest that came in says, just stand up. And I'm trying to reason with him, please, whatever we need to do, can I just stay sitting down? But I look back now and I thank God that I stood up. Because it's dead easy to sit in a church and maybe get lost in the crowd. But standing up, that was me saying to all my pals, this isn't a phase. Mm-hmm. This is real.
I'm serious.
And it was real.
Yeah.
It wasn't just religion. It wasn't. I mean, religion would bore you to tears. Without relationship religion, who would want to sing hymns that they don't mean? I mean, that would drive you mad. Yeah. So I stood up and I prayed in front of all my pals, and something along the lines of, Lord Jesus, please forgive me. I've hurt so many people. I've taken a life, an image bearer of God, and I need forgiveness. And come into my life and change me. And an amazing thing happened that day. And nobody can convince me otherwise. It wasn't a religious experience. It was coming into a relationship with God. Jesus Christ came into my life that day. And that was the first time in my life I'd ever felt free.
Wow.
I was utterly liberated. Now, I couldn't go out the jail. I couldn't go up the street. Couldn't go to the shops. Couldn't go home. But the freedom. And of course Jesus in the Bible speaks about that. If anybody knows him, he sets you free and you're free indeed. So I tell people today I had to go to jail to get set free.
Amazing.
So that was 29 years ago.
Yeah. And that was at a stage though where you're still in remand, you still got the trial to go through. So despite that, you're still on this kind of, I suppose,
in denial journey. That's another one of my great regrets. I remember, I says earlier, the biggest regret is the crime itself. Then my grandfather never having the chance to go back and say sorry. The other great regret is that as a Christian, I went up into the court and lied. And that's one of the reasons why I contacted Lord Beckett to say, look, I'm sorry, I lied. I lied to you. My lawyer at the time, Joe Beltrami, or Murray Macara.
Yeah.
Murray Macara and Gary McAteer.
Yep. I've
since went into their office to say, I need to apologise to you. I lied through my teeth that day, and they both looked back and thought, oh, do you think we didn't know that? We saw the evidence, but for me it was important to say, look, I wished I could change that. Yep. And as a Christian, it's one of the biggest regrets in my life, because you want to tell the truth. Yeah. But I was a daft 19-year-old, terrified teenager.
Yeah. But then sometimes doing that and recognising the failings actually makes you, push harder, further later on. If you think, I wish I'd done that, then you get another opportunity.
Aye, truth means more today. Yeah. Because I know what it is to lie as a Christian.
And so your contact with the prison fellowship, did that continue then?
Throughout my whole sentence.
Okay. So you sought them out, did you, to wherever you went?
They sought us out. Okay. Aye, they a guard, a prison officer will shout, prison fellowship meeting, so it's known that there's these meetings. Mm-hmm. So I attended throughout my whole sentence. Right.
And did you remain then in Long again for a time until such times?
When I was found guilty, we were moved to Berlin for a night.
Right. And how was that?
Horrendous. All the old lags that were doing maybe 6 and 7 weeks, they felt terribly sorry for me and my co-accused, we were put in the same cell, me and my co-accused. And I think some old cons gave us cigarettes, and they were trying to give us, I think they were trying to give us drugs, you know, like Valium and things like that. And so we spent a night there, I think, and then we were moved to Polmont Young Offenders. But the young offenders, the long-term young offenders at that time was Jessiefield and Dumfries.
Okay.
So we eventually get taken there. So down to Dumfries, and I spent about 18 months there until I turned 21.
Right.
Then went to Perth, then Greenock,
Okay.
Castle Huntly.
And throughout all of those prisons, you're still going to prison fellowship?
Yep.
You're still growing as a Christian, were you? Or were you behaving in prison, or were you getting into...
Do you know, I spent 11 years in prison, so it was my punishment part was 11 years. This is a miracle, what I'm about to tell you. I never had one disciplinary report throughout 11 years. Not because I was a good guy or you know, try to pull the wool over any guard's eyes. I realised as a Christian, so you read parts of the Bible, there's a passage, Romans 13, that all authority has been put there by God. So when the officers shouted at night, lock up everybody behind their doors so that they could go home, I made sure I was first behind my door. Not to get brownie points or anything, but because I thought, that's what the Bible says. These people have been put in a position of authority by God. So, and the guards were very kind to me because of that.
Okay.
So when everybody was locked up and all the doors were closed, some guards used to open my door and say, my wife made those sandwiches today, I never had a chance to eat them. You can eat them. I had that loads of times.
So you found favour?
Absolutely. There was guards that were very, very kind, very kind. In fact, the day before I got married, so I'd been out of prison about just over a year from Castle Huntly, and there was 2 prison officers from Castle Huntly. I still don't know how they found out I got married, but they phoned me. Don't know how they got my number. And they says, we heard you're getting married tomorrow. We just wanted to phone to say all the best.
Oh.
I was dead emotional. I was actually crying because I thought, that doesn't happen. So some of the guards, there was other guards that weren't too nice, but there was guards that were very nice, kind
absolutely.
towards us.
And so did your faith just keep growing in prison, or...
I would love to tell you it was all onwards and upwards. There was times where in Greenock prison, so that was kind of like a semi-open prison. Now, what I've not told you, I was into music before I got to jail. I was in a band, I sang in a band before I got to jail. I loved music. So when I was in prison, I'd done a degree in music, and I was allowed to go to James Watt College in Greenock, so I was getting out every day. And so I'm getting out as a Christian, and I'm thinking, this will be great, I can tell people about my faith. Well, I was thrown into a class full of females. Now, I'd been in the jail since I was 19. I'm now 25, and I just didn't know how to cope, and I ended up with a girlfriend, and it was a disaster. And you weren't allowed to do that. If that was found out, I would have been put back to closed conditions.
Right.
So I found that very, very difficult in that period of time, because I didn't know if I was free or incarcerated. I didn't know what I was. So you have to go out, but you've not to be... I mean, it's natural if you're in a crowd of, somebody for the opposite sex or that, it was perfectly natural. But you weren't allowed. And I couldn't cope with the freedom. I found that the most difficult part of my sentence, the freedom part, because I was going back every night to prison, and I couldn't cope with that at all. So I ended up having this girlfriend, and less says the better. I'll just leave it there.
But yeah, I can see that. I suppose the idea is to reintroduce you to society, but actually if you're not able to engage in society,
what
then
kind of freedom is it?
Confusing.
Absolutely. So you're now getting a degree of freedom, don't have any emotional connections, don't have any relationships, don't build friendships. What kind of freedom? If that's the freedom I'm getting prepared for, I think I'd just prefer to stay in prison.
Kind of a torment, isn't it?
It would drive you mad. Because it's natural when you're out there to think I'm free. But you're not really.
No. And so it came to the end of your sentence then, and I mean, did you have thoughts as to what you were going to do when you were released, or how did you see your future, having been saved in prison on this path?
Yeah.
What were your plans and hopes for the future?
I was doing music, so I'd done this degree in music, and the governor at Castle Huntly prison I was getting invited out to churches. So I had a band when I first got released as well, but before that I was going out and doing wee concert things, but also sharing my story and things like that, which I would change that, because sometimes when people, you know, have got the Damascus Road experience and the big conversion story, that churches can celebrate that, and there is a celebratory aspect that Jesus has saved this person from darkness, brought them into light, but you almost become like a performing monkey, you know, and there's a gospel responsibility towards the victim's family.
Yeah.
They're not going to hear that I'm now a Christian and say, oh, hallelujah, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
So I was naive and gullible about all that stuff, so I was going out to churches, giving my story, and
I expect a bit of scepticism as well, you know, people, the victim's family, who are left hurt and
absolutely
dealing with that, and then cynically maybe thinking,
he's working
look at him, look at him, he's got his life and he's cracking on with it, and
he understand that.
Doesn't he really care?
Yep.
And I'd read some things and
I ended up on songs of praise and all that.
As if you're gloating, where that
was awful.
Couldn't be further from the truth. But I suppose it's been sensitive around that as well. But
so I was doing that for a number of months. Then I thought I need a job, so I started working. I was teaching guitar for an organisation called Blue Triangle Housing Association. It's like a social work organisation. It was actually an ex-prison officer that got me the job. So I was earning money with that. I didn't want to go out either and just be signing on and become another statistic. You know, poor me, I've been in the jail. I need counselling for the rest of my life. I thought, no, I want to do something. And so I was getting invited into schools as well to do chaplaincy work, but so there was gang problems in schools. A headmaster would phone me, could you come in, speak about the dangers of knives and drink and drugs. But that ended up a disaster, because I spoke at a school in Edinburgh, and it turned out there was a distant relative of the victim.
Oh no.
And the poor headmaster never knew, I never knew.
Yeah.
So this young girl went home and says to her mum, this guy, guess who was in speaking to us? And the mother contacted the papers, and I was all over the papers and things. So I knew I needed to get away from just regurgitating the past. I got a job with Prison Fellowship, so I ended up going back into the prisons, leading Bible studies. You must be mad, what, to get back in after 11 years? So, and I'm married at this time as well. And
so I meant to ask you, how did you meet your wife? And
I was at a church giving my testimony, and she was there. So that was and I got released in 2005. Met Debbie in 2006, February. We were married in July 2006, so I thought I better marry her before she gets to know me. She'll never marry me once she knows me. So I was even thinking as well, at that time I've got a young family. I don't want them getting brought into this whole story and me getting into prisons. And I was meeting guys for the past. And it wasn't a healthy environment. So I was doing a number of things. I ended up working with Strathclyde Police with the Violence Reduction Unit. So I got a phone call for 2 police officers who ran the Violence Reduction Unit, and they says, we've just heard your name, your life story, it's changed from what it was. Would you meet with us? So I met with these 2 officers, and one of them says, tell us everything about who you are, where you came from. We know some of it. So I told him, and as I told him where I came from, the crime, his face, the colour, everything visibly changed. And his name was Andy Mackay. I says, Andy, have I offended you? Yeah, because you've completely changed. He says, you've not offended me, but the penny's just dropped. I was one of the arresting officers that came through your grandmother's door that morning.
No.
So I was sitting in a coffee shop with him in Easterhouse. The guy that came through, and he didn't recognise me. It was years later, and I didn't recognise him. And it was like a Hollywood moment. I mean, a film couldn't make that up. That would come under fiction. Yeah. And he says, how on earth are we sitting here? And I think he says as well, and how have I bought the coffees for an ex-con that I jailed? And I says to him, I remember my words to him, Andy, here's how we're sitting here and why the the guy that's on life licence ends up working with the guy that jailed him. The Bible says if anyone is in Christ, they're a new creation. It's what God does.
Yeah.
And I've had a few experiences like that. I was speaking at a church in Bothwell, maybe about 15, 16 years ago. An old man came up at the end. He's visibly moved, crying. And at first I'm thinking, is it my dad? Because I don't know who he is. But it wasn't my dad, but it was an old guy, Jerry, and he came up and says, you don't know me, but I know you. The last time I saw you, I says, guilty. I was in the jury.
No.
Me and Jerry became very good pals.
Amazing.
We embraced each other that night as brothers in Christ. We were both in floods of tears. So old Jerry, the last time he saw me, he was on the jury.
That's incredible.
So, but the power of the gospel that reconciles cops who jail you to the guys at the jail, jury members to the guys that they convict.
Absolutely.
There's been lots of experiences like that. So that was going around churches that led to that, and then working with the police. Then I went to Bible college because I thought, I'm speaking about the Bible at churches. I don't know how to handle the Bible. I don't know what to do with this book. I believe it, but I don't know how one part fits into another context, historical context. So I went to Bible college and did that, and then a post opened up to be an assistant minister in the Church of England. So I was down in Whitehaven for 3 years as an assistant minister in the Anglican Church. And then the post opened up for Bishop Briggs Free Church of Scotland 10 years ago, and I've been there since.
Amazing. Incredible, I want to say story, but it's your life. And
An incredible God.
Absolutely. And I mean, you make it sound as if it was all kind of free, smooth sailing, and I'm sure it wasn't from that moment you made the decision.
Yeah.
I know that you've spoken, because obviously there's a lot in the last couple of years, certainly, for lawyers about trauma and people's upbringing, and that, you know, what you've told us, there obviously was a lot in your young life that affected you, but, and I know your views on kind of trauma and sending people to jail, but could you maybe articulate them, Gary? What are your thoughts about this kind of, what some people might see as a soft touch for not sending young people to prison if they've committed serious offences?
There's of course circumstances that lead to people committing crimes and things like that. I never want to take that upon myself. I mean, there was lots of young guys that had upbringings that were terrible in Yoker, that went on to do brilliant. They went on to do well. They never ended up in the jail. They never carried a knife. They had a stepdad that was bad. So I take full responsibility. For myself, personally, I deserved to have the book thrown at me. But the other side of that, I do recognise there can be others who maybe have not coped with things well, having a terrible upbringing, which I never had. I had a good upbringing, but people might have been through things that most normal people can never even relate to. And then they find themselves in a dock charged. So I do think that needs to be taken into consideration. But know this, we've spoken about this before, know the soft touch. I mean, maybe this is just a background thing and being brought up with my grandfather who was kind of hard line, and there has got to be a punishment, you know, even Bible wise, which Jesus did on that cross, there's got to be a punishment for sin. And it's, I guess it's the same with crime. Now there can be compassion shown along with the sentence, so depending on what the crime is, the judge or the sheriff can maybe say, well, I've took everything into consideration, social work background reports, I think this is the best thing for this person and there's hope for them changing. There'll be other people that just need to go to jail. Sometimes jail works. You know, I've got 4 daughters today. Maybe it's as a dad I say that. If somebody done something to my lassies, I want them to go to jail. So maybe that plays a part in how I think about all this today. But I do recognise that there's times where jail doesn't work. I mean, there's my co-worker who's 29 years later. He never even done the crime.
Yeah. And do you have contact with him?
No, we ended up, because he get found guilty, we fell out because I never put my hands up to it. I actually wrote to him during after we get sentenced, I was reading the Bible one night, and in Proverbs in the Bible, it says these words: acquitting the guilty and condemning the innocent, the Lord detests them both. So I wrote to him and says, you need to get an appeal opened up, and I'll go to the High Court and just say, look, tell the truth. It was me that done all of that. He wasn't even there when the murder happened. He couldn't help not being there. These guys were chasing him. So an appeal was opened up. So it went to Edinburgh High Court, the appeal court, and I was asked, why are you doing this? And I gave that Proverbs quote, because he's innocent.
Yeah.
But they rejected it. They believed that I was telling the truth, because the 3 appeal court judges couldn't work out, why would you do this 7 or 8 years in? Because it took 7 or 8 years for it to end up in court. You could be further punished for having lied and committed perjury and things. And I says, well, it's important. He's innocent. So me, the last time I saw my co-accused, we actually shook hands. And I do think about him. He should not be in jail.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be doing a life sentence. And there he is.
Wow.
So people get put in for when they're innocent, but they also get put in and it doesn't help. He's turned to drugs, maybe to cope with the fact that I'm innocent and I'm in here. And so jail can work, but all too often, we see this in Scotland though, it's just a revolving door.
Yeah,
it doesn't work for a lot of people. They get out on a Friday and back in on a Monday.
And arguably, I mean, in one view, you might say jail worked for you, but it wasn't jail that worked. It was well, I suppose it was the prison fellowship, being there, these people giving up their time to go in and do what Christians are called to do, and but also you responding to that, despite your pals, and knowing that you were going to get a slagging or whatever later on. But clearly that was a pivotal moment in your life.
It wasn't a jail, it worked, it was the gospel. But even going back to the staff being kind and things like that, there was aspects of jail that did work. And we've spoke about this, even time to think about what I'd done. If I'd just been released on bail, I would have been running about daft. And time to think's good. We live in a society where people have not got any time to think with social media. I've taken somebody's life. I don't ever want to get to a point where I don't think about that. Even the day as a Christian, and I believe the whole gospel message that Jesus forgives us, God forgives us through the sacrifice of his son. I never want to reach a point where I think, oh, Jesus has forgave me, I'm cool with what I've done. I hope to my dying day that I have moments where I still struggle, that I've taken somebody's life.
Well, Garry, thank you so much. That was an incredible look at your life and what's happened in it and what you've become. So thank you so much for your time.
Privilege for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.